All right, at this point, hopefully you have watched the video that I posted on YouTube, the video link, and you have read the first supplemental material about the Roaring Twenties. We're fixing to go over that, but at first I just want to give you a little, if you're still struggling with what the concept of the American dream is, you may have heard the term, but pretty much it's this idea, there's this thought process of the American dream is to uh, get as rich as possible. That's kind of where it started. Money. That seems to be what everybody wants in life, is to have money. But really, the Great Gatsby shows you that yes, money is important, and the characters in the Great Gatsby all have a whole lot of money. But when it boils right down to it, the title character Gatsby, his dream is to not be rich. He has a singular dream that does not have anything to do with money. And the money is a way that he thinks he can get it, but the money to him is not important. So to me, that's what the American dream is. Not everybody's American dream is the same. If your dream is to grow up and to have a nice single-wide trailer on a plot of land, that's great. You do you. If your dream is to become an NBA athlete, you do you. But this idea of the American dream being about money is not accurate. So what we're going to do now is we're going to go into the Roaring Twenties. We're going to go over your common lit. I'm not going to sit and read it to you, but I'm going to go over the key points of it, and I'm going to give you the answers of the multiple choice and explain why those are the answers. All right, so we're going to go in here, and we're going to go over this first supplemental material. This is a common lit. If you are a teacher who is not using common lit, you really need to incorporate it into your study, especially if you are a teacher that does not have a strict curriculum. Common lits will definitely help you. I cannot stress enough how awesome they are. And everything I teach, I use common lits as a substitute. As a supplement, because they teach reading comprehension, vocabulary in ways that are so much better than some of the other ways that we're doing it. I definitely recommend this, and the subject matter and all the things you can get are unbelievable. Anyway, so Common Lit, definitely check it out. Free of charge, by the way. All right, so here's this article by this Mike Kubic, and he explains the Roaring Twenties. And if you don't know what the Roaring Twenties were, they were a period of economic prosperity unlike anything America had ever seen before. Right after World War I, people had money, the country was doing great, everybody was happy, and they got a little too happy, and they made mistakes, and bad things happened. All right? So in here, it starts off right here. It was the best of times, it was the worst of times. It's one of the most famous lines in literature history, written by Charles Dickens. The same could be said about the Roaring Twenties, the post-World War I decade when Americans experienced some of their best years as well as some of their worst. It was a period when they reveled in the hijinks of what the period's historian Nathan Miller called an era of wonderful nonsense, but when they also suffered the crushing consequences of what economists call unfettered capitalism. Basically greed, y'all. People got too greedy. People got too consumed with wants as opposed to needs, and bad things followed. I'm not going to read this whole thing, but this is a great lesson about set us up to what ended up going into the Great Depression. Here is an excellent example of what I was talking to you about vocab. You don't understand words? Boom. There they are right there. All right, we go in here and we talk about prohibition. Believe it or not, women up to 1920 could not vote. The Roaring Twenties, they got the right to vote. They were extremely happy. There was a rising demand for for people who wanted, there was a rising demand for workers. People had money, whereas they had not had money before. You got to remember this. This wasn't this long out of the time of cowboys and horses, and out west probably they still were. You know what I mean? Not to the extent, not like John Wayne or anything, or Clint Eastwood movies, but you know what I'm saying. Also, there was an attempt to regulate morals, and alcohol was made illegal. Alcohol was made illegal. It was called Prohibition, but that didn't stop people from making money on alcohol. Just like drugs are illegal now, people who want them find them, and alcohol was that way. They sold it under the counter. It's called bootlegging, and people made a fortune off of it. You've ever heard of the name Al Capone? Al Capone made his living, his money, off of bootlegging. All right, so it talks here about what's going on, success and progress. Everybody's happy, great, money's flowing all around, and then we started to see some things happening. There are some warning signs, some signs of, maybe we're getting a little too much. Maybe we're not being strict enough. Maybe we need some more regulations. Maybe the financial institutions aren't doing what they need to do to make sure that we don't have an issue. Eventually, we had some serious issues. A lot of it was placed at the foot of the president. And I'm going to tell you that no matter what, throughout history, doesn't matter if things are going good, things are going bad. Whoever the president is at the time is going to get either the blame or the praise for it. All right. Let's scoot on down here. You should have already read all this. We get in here, and all of the greed and all of the mistakes and all of the lack of oversight ended up moving us into the Great Depression and something called Black Tuesday. And Black Tuesday was, Black Thursday. And what ended up happening on Black Thursday, October 14th, 1929, was the stock market crash. And it's unlike anything that you could imagine. You may have heard about stock markets crashing now. We have relative safeguards in place to where things like that happened in 1929 should not happen again. Should not happen again. And it caused a global crisis, and people lost everything, and there were no jobs, and people were starving, and you can't imagine what it was like. I can't imagine what it was like. All we can do is, we don't even really have grandparents or anybody around anymore to talk to us about it, because it happened so long ago. All we have now is reading history and watching movies about history. And that's why I believe that history is so important to keep teaching in classrooms, because those who fail to learn from history are doomed to repeat it. Okay? So let's move on down here to our questions. Now, again, these are Common Core State Standard aligned questions. If you take the American History EOC, there is no English 3 EOC in Louisiana, but if you take the American History EOC, or if you're watching this and you're going to take the English 1 or the English 2 EOC, or even in junior high school, these kind of questions, doing this Common Lit, even though you may not be a high school student, you may be a junior high student, you may have already taken my class, whatever, and you have an American History EOC to take. Doing these, practicing on these, will help you do well on these other tests. All right, so it's part A, part B. Which one of the following statements best describes a central idea of the text? Now, the answer to this one is, the answer to this one is C. Americans were indulging in excess and deregulation during the 1920s, unaware this would contribute to an economic crisis. All of this informational text we just read basically sets up this big point that people were partying too much and living too high and wanting too much, as opposed to putting back for their needs. They wanted, and eventually, crisis, bad things. C is the answer. It doesn't have anything to do with President Hoover. That's a small part of it. That's not the overall big picture. It doesn't. Capitalism is to blame. No, that's not. It's not to blame. It's all kinds of other things that were to blame, in addition to capitalism. Americans were more consumed with entertainment and reckless behavior. No, that's not all of it. It has nothing to do with Americans being consumed with entertainment, which led the government to make bad decisions. That's not it. It's this one right here. This is the one that is most specific, that takes the entire part of the work and says, here it is. All right, now you got on part A, part B, whatever you say up here, you have to get something to back it up down here. All right, so the answer to number 2 is B. Which detail from the text best supports the answer to part A? In no mood to worry whether the good times will last, Americans were happily spending money they had to save because of wartime shortages. Hey, we hadn't been able to spend it, we're happy. That's what ended up leading up here. All right, number 3. What connection does the author draw between government leaders and the Great Depression? The answer is A. Despite its many efforts, Hoover was unable to undo the effects of Harding and Coolidge's deregulation of financial practices. This is the summation of what the article said. A. All right, number 4. According to the text, how did the Roaring Twenties develop over time? Cite evidence from the text to support your answer. This is pretty much just, going into, what you take from the text. We've already talked about it being a domino type effect with the stock market. We've talked about how people were excited and happy, and one thing led to another, and they kept moving more and more and more, and the government didn't check anything. So it's kind of like just a snowball. All right, how does paragraph 14 contribute to the development of ideas in the text? Well, let's go up to paragraph 14. Hoover was elected the country's 31st president in 1929. He was a successful mining engineer from Iowa before lending his services to the government. As President Coolidge's Secretary of Commerce, Hoover recognized him already in 1925 that the economy was overheating as Americans began buying on margin and speculating on the soaring stock price market. He urged Coolidge to tighten the credit, take other steps to cool the market, but the president and his Treasury Secretary blocked any attempt at government intrusion into private business. Despite this setback, Hoover went on to handily win the presidential race the following year. All right, so basically how it contributes is here is that there were warning signs, and the people in power didn't want to do anything about it. In my opinion, this is your opinion. How does the paragraph contribute to the development of ideas? They didn't want to do anything about it because they didn't want to alienate their people. They didn't want to alienate the voters because everybody was happy, and they're going to kick the problem on down the road. Kick the can down the road is pretty much what it was, even though the person coming in said, hey, we need to do something about this. And then it fell on his shoulders to try to fix it. All right, down here, these are just your opinions. I can't answer these. These are just your opinions. In your opinion, what does the quote, the government that governs least governs the best, from paragraph 12 mean? All right, basically, I'm not going to give you my opinion, but what this means is, and this is a quote from Henry David Thoreau, and we're going to do Henry David Thoreau at some point in the future. This is basically talking about limited government. Is it better to have limited government or not so much limited government? This comes down to a political ideology, pretty much. Should the government be involved in people's everyday lives? All right, that's what it's asking you. That's your opinion, yes or no. Do you agree with Hoover's statement that capitalism produces greed? Now, sometimes I have students who don't know what capitalism is. Capitalism is the economic system that America runs on. Basically, it's this idea of if you work hard, you will achieve great things. If you take risks, you will achieve great things. It's all up to you. The government shouldn't be involved. I'm going to do this. A survival of the fittest, if you will. Socialism and communism, there are other forms of economic systems, government control, those kind of things, and they're kind of opposite. They're more along the lines of the greater group, the people as a whole are more important than person. Okay, and so they have social programs and things like that. Capitalism doesn't necessarily do away with those things, but it's more about the individual, whereas socialism and communism are more about the group as a whole. All right, number 3, in the context of the text, how has America changed over time? How does the United States economy of the 1930s compare to the economy of today? Y'all, look, this is just your opinion. It's something you would want to work out, but a lot of the same issues that we had all those years ago, they're coming back around today. They already came back around in 2008. If you don't know what the housing crisis was in 2008, you should look that up. But we also have some issues, especially with Corona and quarantine. We had some serious issues with the stock market. All right. Pardon that text notification. We had some serious issues with the stock market and causing big problems, a lot of similarities between then and now. That's our first lesson. That's our first video, the history of the Roaring Twenties and the idea of the American dream, how you can work hard and get what you want, period. The next lesson is going to focus on a common phrase called keeping up with the Joneses. Keeping up with the Joneses. Keeping up with the Joneses was an idea of trying to do something not because you want it, but because somebody else is doing it. Appearances, basically. Keeping up appearances. So people think that you are just as rich as the other person. Look forward to seeing you again.